thing here. So let's take a look at this problem here, which is, again, this is back in chapter 2, back in our test 2, I believe either test 2 or test 1, which is they ask you to solve graph and write your interval notation, right? So the solving part is easy, right? The solving part, reminder, what do we do with this thing here? Well, the first thing we have to do is, because that's a parenthesis, we have to get rid of the parenthesis. And to get rid of the parenthesis, we have to distributive, right? We have to distributive the 2n, which is 2 times 4. As you can see, this is what we have, right? We take the 2 times the 4 and 2 times the 6, which is, again, 2 times 4 will give you 8, 2 times 6 to give you 12, which is, this is what we have, which is, again, 2 times 8x and 12, right? And again, because we have an x on this side and an x on this side, we know that we want to move our x to one side. And again, to do that, we have to do the opposite operation, which is the ax become, if I have to subtract to get to the other side, and the 4, I just do it all in one, which is the 4 I have to add, right? Which is, again, reminder, at -10 and -8, this thing will give you -18, and 12 plus 4 to give you 16. And again, ladies and gentlemen, this is a rule. Take a note, not take a note, but write a note for yourself. It's, we know that we have to divide, right? And reminder that every time you divide by a negative number, right? Every time you divide by a negative number, in this case, we have to divide by a -18, which is reminder that every time you divide by a negative number, your inequality switch the direction, right? Because we divide by a -18, remember, this is what we have right here. Your inequality is less than, now it's become greater than, okay? So again, make sure that you remember this on your test, on your final exam, is every time you divide or multiply by a negative number, your inequality switch the direction. So looking at this thing here, this is what we have, which is, again, the only thing left we have is we need to simplify this thing here, which is to simplify this thing here, which is we divide by 2, right? 2 going 16 is 8, 2 going 18 is 9, which is we still have a negative here, which is, again, this is what we have in a sense of solving, right? We solve this, which is, again, our x is by itself. That's our goal, right? So we're done with the solving part, which is, if you remember now, our next part is we have to graph. How do we graph this thing here? Reminder, right? For me, just write this, identify your endpoint, which is, again, your endpoint is at -8, 9, right? 8 over 9. So let me ask you guys, right? At the endpoint, at this endpoint, do we use bracket or parenthesis, and do we shade it to the left or to the right? So again, reminder, if your x is on the left, wherever the inequality pointed, that is where we shade it, right? Which is, again, reminder, because there's an equal sign, we have to use a bracket and shade it to the right, right? So again, this is your shaded item, which is, again, because there's an equal sign, because there's a line, we use a bracket and we shade it to the right because x is bigger than whatever this endpoint is, which is any number to the right is bigger, right? And again, how do we write this in interval notation, which is, again, all you do is you take bracket, your endpoint, all the way to your infinity. Reminder, at infinity, we only use a parenthesis. We cannot use a bracket. Okay, so this is what we have, which is, again, we solve right here. This is your solving item. This is your solve item. This is your graph item. And this is your interval notation, which is, again, on your test, they will ask you solve graph and write interval notation. And again, it's multiple choice, so you have to make sure you choose the correct graph in terms of that. Okay. So let's try another one, which is, again, similarly, right? Similarly, we have this item here, which is, for instance, I have -12, right? Let's say I have -12x plus 3 times 2x minus 8 greater than x plus 4. So looking at this thing here, just like before, just like the above item, the first thing we need to do is we need to get rid of parenthesis. And to get rid of parenthesis, we need to distributive, which is, again, if we distributive, this is what you should get, which is 3 times 2 is 6, and 3 times 8 is 24. Agree? And now, reminder, this thing here, this is, you have this thing on one side. And if it's on one side, we do not do any opposite operation. We just combine like term. And to combine like term, which is negative 12x plus 6x. Negative 12x plus 6x will give me a negative 6. Negative 24x plus 4, everything else stay the same. And now, once we have this thing here, hopefully you guys say, well, now I have x on both sides. And my number is on both sides. Let me move my x, which is, again, if you move your x, you minus. If you move your 24, you plus. You do the opposite operation and you move it to the other side, which is when you combine them, this is what you have, which is negative 6 and negative 1x, right? Negative 6 and negative 1x, that's how I got a negative 7x, because same side I need to add and kept the sign. And again, 4 plus 24 will give me 28. And again, reminder, when you divide by a negative number, which is in this case, everybody see that I divide by a negative 7. And because I divide by negative 7, my inequality from greater than have to become less than, which is, again, 28 divided by negative 7, that will give me negative 4. So again, hopefully this bring back your, bring back memory on the first month of the semester. It's been a long time. A lot of things happened, but again, hopefully you remember this thing. Solving is the same as before. Just get x by itself. The only thing you have to remember is every time you divide by a negative number, your inequality switch the direction, right? Change the direction. Now, the other thing we have is, again, like I mentioned, all we need to do is identify your endpoint, which is in this case, the endpoint is at negative 4. Now, the only thing else you have to remember is this item, do you use a bracket or parenthesis, which is in this case, you will say that hopefully you say we're using a parenthesis. And do we shade it to the left or to the right? Again, it's pointed to the left, so we use the parenthesis and shade it to the left, which is, again, this is what you have, which is reminder the difference between a parenthesis and a bracket is if there's an equal sign, if there's a line, we use a bracket. If they don't have a line underneath the inequality, we use the parenthesis, which is in this case, reminder, what is the smallest number we have? The smallest number is somewhere on this side. And if it's somewhere on this side, we'll start with a negative infinity, go all the way to your endpoint, which would go all the way to negative 4. Okay. So again, hopefully you remember that. Again, looking at this thing here, we start with negative infinity, go all the way to 4, go to your endpoint. If it's this item, if it's going this way, we start at your endpoint and we go to positive infinity. Okay. So again, like I mentioned, is a lot of things to remember from the beginning of semester. But again, hopefully this is a review. The other thing we have is something like this, which is, again, let me go over number 3, and then I will see if you guys have a question. Again, looking at this thing here, reminder, what do we need to do? If you remember in class, I told you guys that if you have this compound, right? If you have this compound inequality, we have the inequality on the left, and we have the inequality on the right. So we have a compound inequality, which is, if you remember, this is what I tell you guys is whatever in the center, your goal is whatever in the center, you have to get rid of this thing here to get x by itself, right? You have to get rid of this thing here and get x by itself, which is in this case, how do you get rid of the 9? Which is this thing here, like I mentioned, to get rid of the 9, we have to divide by 9, and whatever we do it in the center, whatever we do in the center, we do it on the left, and we do it on the right, which is negative 36 divided by 9. This thing will give me 4, or negative 4, and 54 divided by 9 will give me 6. which is, again, our goal is done, ladies and gentlemen. We solve for x. Your x is by itself. That's your goal, right? Your x is by itself. Now, what do we do? What is the difference between number 3 versus number 1 and number 2? Well, number 3, you have two endpoints, right? You have a -4 and 6. You have the left, smaller number to the left and bigger number on the right. And again, I purposely give you this problem to remind you guys, ladies and gentlemen, reminder that if there's an equal sign, everybody see that if there's an equal sign, we have to use a bracket. And if they don't have an equal sign, we have to use the parenthesis. Everybody see that the -4, because there's the equal sign, we use a bracket. At 6, they don't have an equal sign, you have to use the parenthesis. And reminder that this is your graph for your compound inequality. It's basically ask you find me a number that is bigger than -4 but smaller than 6, which is this group of number is the number that bigger than -4 but smaller than 6. And again, how do you write the interval notation? Which is interval notation is easy. You take whatever your graph is and you just put in you insert the number on the inside, right? So again, this is what you have, which is this is the item in terms of compound inequality, right? So again, let me ask you guys a question so far. Question with all the thing that we go over this thing here. We went all over, we went over all this thing here last time, which is in the sense of we went over all this thing in class, right?